Hello guys, I have recently started to hear so much about how dark and gritty Final Fantasy XVI is, and how it in many ways are far closer to Game of Thrones than any one of your normal mainline Final Fantasy games. For many people this may come as a shock, as even though most Final Fantasy games have a dark tone, you can always make kind of a distinction of what is good and evil, as they always oppose each other. The question many people seem to have here is how Final Fantasy, a series built on Japanese lightheartedness with chocobos, moogles and crystals, will be able to tackle a more cynical plotline full of backstabbing and deceit, while also having mature scenes. Are they walking away from their Eastern origins to serve a Western, more mainstream crowd instead? For sure, the new generation of graphics have added to the gritty experience, but to those who think this is a new concept, I want to mention another game in the series, namely Final Fantasy Tactics. This game is a very different experience compared to the others in the series, and I feel that it's far too often forgotten about. It may not have been rated M, but it still handled the same mature topics. I first played this game in around 2007 on my PSP, far past the original release date back on PS1, 1997. In the beginning I was very skeptical of the very different style of combat compared to the earlier games I had played in the series. Instead of normal turn-based I now had to work with placement on the map, and it took me some time to get used to, especially since you now also had a permadeath system. However, the story got me hooked, and even if I constantly struggled with the combat, to the point of me even having to restart the game quite far in at one point. Yeah, you know the place. I just couldn't put the game down. What surprised me the most was the constant change of directions the plot took, and how the game constantly managed to surprise you with how certain characters schemed against each other. I think this type of uncertainty actually makes you bond with each character more, as you, just like them, trying to figure the same thing out, without having a real clue of what the next twist will be and how it will affect you or those around you. This in turn will make you play the game with a mindset focused on the present, instead of speculating too much about the future. The story itself is about how two friends get separated through class and ideology, bound to a struggle against the superior upper power, and forced to sometimes make decisions they may not stand behind morally. As the plot thickens, you as well as the character will learn that there is no good side, just different factions that all try to do what seems right for them. Some try to gain influence and power that they think they somehow deserve through either birthright or religion, while others try to stand on their morals, doing what they think is right at the moment. Today this concept may seem easier to compare to Game of Thrones than to any other Final Fantasy game, and it is definitely not wrong to do so. Final Fantasy Tactics is just like Game of Thrones, based on a series of civil wars back in Britain going on for over 30 years called the Wars of Roses, ending in 1487. This happened right after a long war with France, and these civil wars were fought between House Lancaster, who had a red rose on its banner, and House York, who in turn had a banner with a white rose. The goal for each house was to succeed the throne, and it led to a series of battles as well as loads of scheming and plotting, both during and afterwards. Similar to this, Final Fantasy Tactics took place after 50 years of war between Ivalice and Ordalia. As the ruler of Ivalice, King Denamanda IV, dies, power is up for grabs, and his son and daughter are both suited for the throne. The noble houses now use the young royal heirs as pawns to gain further influence and power. This in turn leads to a civil war called the War of the Lions, fought between the two houses of Duke Oltana with a black lion on its banner, and Duke Larg with a white lion in turn. However, several other factions play a role here, as smaller noble houses and even the church itself plot to gain the upper hand. As the noble houses struggle for power, the poor commoners starve, leading them to despise the nobles and causing them to rebel. As the game's main protagonist earlier mentioned, you have Ramza Beolve, a young man born a noble of the House Beolve, and raised together with the second character mentioned earlier, namely his best friend Delita, who unlike him is a commoner. They both witnessed Delita's sister die in the uprisings, as she is held hostage by the rebels and killed by nobles who refused to negotiate since she wasn't of noble bloodline. The one ordering the killing shot was no other than Ramza's own brother Salbag. This causes Delita, who was raised by the same noble house, to understand that loyalty and honor means nothing to the nobles, who only cares about heritage and power. He therefore declares a personal war on the nobility as he wanders off, believed to have died in an explosion. Ramza, who also saw what happened to Delita's sister, is just as appalled by his brother's action, and he cuts his ties with the House Beolve, and instead decides to be a sellsword. From here on we get to follow both of these characters, mostly through the eyes of Ramza, but also through Delita. They both work towards their own personal beliefs of the greater good. Ramza is more of a typical protagonist, while Delita is usually more willing to get his hands a bit dirty, making him one of, if not the best anti-hero in Final Fantasy. Another character holding an important role in the game is the Holy Knight Agrias, who is the bodyguard of Princess Ovelia. a young lady not only powerful in battle, but also very loyal to the princess. Compared to Steiner in Final Fantasy IX, who holds a similar role, Agrias is far more realistic as a character, as she is willing to work with everyone to keep the princess safe and actually grow with her task. As Ramsa's and Delita's paths are crossing, you are constantly reminded on how different the choices are, and you start to speculating on who is right. Questions like, has Ramsa been too naive and trusting others? Or, are Delita's schemes going to backfire? Who will be the next one to fall to the plot twists? And what will be their endgame? Was that a demon? What comes to the gameplay, it's not an open world in the normal regard. Instead, you move across different regions of the map that may have a fixed encounter the first time you pass through it, as well as a risk of random encounter later in the game. As you pass through the main storyline, you will unlock new areas as well as secret quests. When it comes to the RPG aspects of the game, it borrowed the job class system used in Final Fantasy III and V, where you are able to customize your characters very freely by assigning them different classes. These classes are in turn unlocked by leveling up other jobs, where some jobs is required to reach a certain level before other ones unlock. What the game does really well here, that I really appreciate, is that it also gives each story character their own special job with their own special skills, making them stand out while also building them to suit your playstyle. This together with the permadeath system makes the game very enjoyable, as you know a character can be lost forever if knocked out for too long, making you lose all the progress you made on that character up until that moment. I do understand that this may not be for everyone, but I believe it makes you more conscious in your decisions. The combat itself is also very exciting, as there are several ways you may play your game due to the many customizations available through different job classes. Most of the battles in the main game are also fairly challenging, making it quite a task to beat certain scenarios. The game is of course not without flaws, and in some instances the game even makes it possible to save lock yourself inside a mission with several stages, which in turn makes leveling up your party impossible until the quest is done. If you're not able to beat the quest that time, the only thing you can do is to restart from a second earlier save, if you have one, and in worst case restart the game, which sucks in every way. Always keep at least 2 different save files, guys. All in all, the gameplay is a fairly addicting and fun way of playing Final Fantasy game, and it may leave you grinding for hours to build your dream team. As you may have already realized by now, this is not your typical Final Fantasy game, and it shouldn't be looked upon as such. Instead, you have a very different type of game, not shying away from the more mature topics such as sex, abuse and violence, but instead it uses them to tell a dark, compelling story, while also choosing a different style of combat and progression. If you ask me if this should be the norm for every Final Fantasy game, I would most likely say no. One of the reasons I love the series is that it's focused on telling good stories, and not all of them have to be gritty. I do, however, appreciate a darker game every now and then, and I'm very glad that series dared to try a different thing here, just as I'm very glad that they are doing the same with Final Fantasy XVI today. It may not be what everyone wants, but we cannot always satisfy everyone. We fans will always appreciate different things, and sometimes we don't even know what we want ourselves until we give something new a chance. But what do you guys think? Did you try Final Fantasy Tactics? How do you feel about darker games? And how do you think the future will be in Final Fantasy? Write in the comments what you think, and like and subscribe the video for more content like this. Until next time, hej då!